Oh yeah, and it's not the font that we wanted, but is that
no,
okay?
it isn't the font we wanted, which is a shame. I can't get it up. It's worked perfectly in rehearsal, and of course, sod's law, it doesn't now. Anyway, so what we'll do is we'll go with this one here, which had some lovely fonts here, some lovely kind of old school fonts, which looked great, but the content is the same really. So anyway, this is a talk, Tales from the Ghost Town, Stories of Coventry's Punk Fanzines 79 to 85, and that's me, Alan Ryder. So let's just do a quick intro first. Next slide, please. So who am I? What I'm going to talk about today, and what's the structure of this talk, it should say there. So if you just go on to the next one, structure of the talk, I think we've already covered the questions at the end. I'll just go through it kind of in order. But who am I? So this is me, Coventry, 1981, kind of back in the day. So it's a shame this is not really showing as it should be, which is a real shame actually, because it would look nice. But I am, or was rather, the editor of this fanzine called Adventures in Reality. I'm also a magician, and also currently an author of these two books. Next slide, please. So one on Adventures in Reality, which puts together all of the fanzines that I produced, all 13 issues and a lot more besides, all in one quite chunky volume, 400-page volume reproduced. And Tales from the Ghost Town, the more recent one, which came out this year, the one came out last year, which is about Coventry's punk and post-punk fanzines, including Adventures in Reality. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Next, please. So, next. So these are Coventry fanzines, lots of them. There was over 50 produced in that period, and it's a huge variety. So we'll touch on some of those. We're not going to get through all 50. But what I'll try and do is give you a flavour of what it was like and kind of how they came about, and perhaps the kind of different styles and techniques that they use. Have the next one, please. So before we start, let's just clarify what fanzine is. Some of you may know this, apologies if you do, but these are, strictly speaking, fanzines. Okay, so fan magazines produced independently by people on a particular topic which they are keen or an expert on. So this one here, The Comet, May 1930, is probably the first true fanzine, and it was on science fiction, and then lots more happened in the subsequent years, science fiction, films, even television, obviously pop stars like Elvis. This one's 1969, but there's been lots of other fan club magazines since. Football fanzines you're probably familiar with as well. But in 1976, next slide, this happened. I'm sure you know what that is, punk rock, etc. So this is Sex Pistols when they visited Coventry 1977, December. You see that flyer there, they played that. I wasn't at this one, I was a bit too young, unfortunately. I don't know what Sid's thinking there, but he's standing outside Coventry rail station, and then just shortly after this they went over to the United States for a rather disastrous tour, and then they split up and reformed years later, of course, to make a bit more money, but split up properly. But with punk, and with the advent of punk, came, next slide please, this fanzines, punk fanzines. So this was a step forward from the fan club magazines that we've seen. The first one was one called Sniffing Glue, or was commonly acknowledged to be the first one. Fairly 1976 June, I think. Fairly basic thing. I know you probably can't see that very easily, but it was just 4 photocopied double-sided sheets with handwritten headings and just typed content, so fairly basic. And then it went on to do more issues over the next kind of year or so. I think about 12 issues that they did, but it did start something. So next slide, a whole load of different fanzines followed. Here's just a few of them from the time. You can see the sentiment there up yours, very punk kind of Thing, Ripped and Torn, Chainsaw, 48 Thrills, and a lot of bands they featured you're familiar with now, like the Buzzcocks, the Jam, Generation X, and of course Sex Pistols as well. There's a few more on the next slide. So in the city, nice use of colour there. Situation 3, you can see humour is actually quite important for fanzines. That irreverent way that fanzines are done is they're not about slavish fan devotion, they're about alternative press, about offering an alternative view, and humour is part of that. So watch out for exploding Easter eggs is a good example of that, but you'll see bits of that will kind of appear throughout. So next slide. So if you fast forward a couple of years, so 1976, 77, punk started, but it took a little while to kind of get to all corners of the world, really, but certainly of the country, and Coventry was no exception. So by 1979, it certainly reached there. People were doing things for themselves. But what was it like in Coventry? So just to set that context, next slide. This is what it was like. Kind of tells the story itself, doesn't it? 79 and in the early 80s. I took this in 1980, this photo. This is what greeted you as you came into the train station from London and other places. Coventry, city of skills and opportunities, it said on the sign, sitting in this blasted wasteland of urban decay, which looked like it had been bombed, but actually was just demolished. Coventry was, of course, famously bombed in the war, but it also suffered a lot in a big recession that we had at the time. Next slide. So there was a lot of civil unrest and strife across the whole country. Miners' strike was going on. Everybody's on strike, it seemed. It was quite a confrontational time. Margaret Thatcher was in government at the time. In 1976, it was Labour, so it wasn't about party political thing. It was just really about the kind of overall kind of environment of the time. Next slide. And of course, with that recession came lots of closures, so there wasn't a lot of work around. This is a typical common scene in Coventry and lots of other places at the time. Factories closed, gates locked, no work, no jobs to do. Coventry was a manufacturing centre for cars and industry, and it suffered pretty badly, which meant that there was no jobs for young people to do, and therefore lots of time to do other things like form bands. And of course they did, including this one. Next slide. Which you will be familiar with, the Specials, standing again at the railway station, but on the platform side rather than on the Sex Pistols side, and of course Two Tone and all the bands that came with that sprang out of the social situation, and also the fact that people wanted to protest. But they weren't the only band in Coventry. There was a thriving local band scene that wasn't all about ska. Next slide. There was loads of bands playing all the time. This one here, called God's Toys, was more like a kind of arty band, a little bit weird in a way, but there were also a whole load of other bands covering all sorts of styles. Next slide. Next one, that's it. So you've got more kind of old school punk. So there on the left, this local character Bev in a band called Homicide, wearing a dinosaur costume, which kind of symbolised what punk was already becoming by that time. And then you've got more arty kind of two-piece electronic and kind of guitar bands like In the Middle, Alice in Gaza, and then your more kind of skinhead bands, Criminal Class, with aptly named kind of skinhead band there. So I would be going to see all of these bands and lots of people too, playing in all sorts of venues. Next slide. So big and small, including pub venues like this one here called the General Wharf. So U2 played here, a number of other bands in that back room, which is down on the kind of right hand side of the slide, where this photo was taken. Next slide. You've seen me from this photo, but these four characters here with their dubious kind of dress sense are all fanzine editors. We often used to bump into each other at gigs, things like that. Three of these are from the Coventry area. The guy in the check shirt is actually from Leicester, so sorry, Gary, that's his name, we won't cover you, but we'll cover the others. And one of the editors here actually started the whole thing off really as far as Coventry was concerned. So next slide. And that's this guy here called Martin Bowes. He started a fanzine called Alternative Sounds. So next slide. So this is alternative sounds, or some of them. So he did 18 issues of this. As you can see, you know, it's got a nice style. It's hand-done lettering on there, covering local bands like the Specials, or Special AKAs they were called at the time. Also more national bands like the Buzzcocks, Gary Newman in there, Susan the Banshees, even Gary Glitter when, you know, he wasn't out of favour. But also, you know, things like cassette releases, things like that. And this actually galvanised the local scene quite a lot. It brought it all together. Some more examples on the next slide. So next slide, Phil. There we go. So it got more glossy as it went along. Now if you just go back one. Yeah, let's go back. That's it. So it got more glossy as it went along. So a nice photo there, that is Criminal Class actually, sitting on that wall of prison. And it did some different formats as well. So that one there was actually kind of newspaper format. It's quite large, and it had like a cutout punk rocker on the front that you could dress up. You cut that out, and I did actually do that, and you may be able to see that, but here he is. Okay, I don't think that's supposed to be the editor. Doesn't look much like him actually, but yeah, it does actually work. So I thought I'd give it a go, see if it worked, and it does. But yeah, some nice formats there. So next slide. He's also, Ian Martin was also, apart from doing his fanzine, pretty busy on lots of other fronts. He put together this compilation album for a record label with all local acts on it. Top right there, you can see him being filmed by the BBC for a music programme. And bottom right, he had his own band called Attrition, which was playing at the time and is still going. And he's produced over 70 albums. Probably tell me off now saying he's done more. And you know, they're still going strong, played all over the world. So he was a busy chap, and actually quite common for a lot of fanzine editors to carry on, you know, either going into music or other artistic things. It tended to influence what you did afterwards, both in attitude and also sometimes in the jobs that you did as well. So people are working in media for the Guardian and television stations, things like that afterwards. So next slide. So let's go on to this other chap here. This is a guy called Phil Clark. He's actually from Nuneaton, which is a satellite town from Coventry. But he also started a fanzine. So next slide, which was one called Damn Latin. A very basic start to this one. Damn Latin, the name, actually comes from a song by a group called The Fall. So I guess a lot of you probably watching it will know that, but some of you live may not. But damn Latin is really bad journalism, you know, so Latin as in you don't really understand it, and damn as in it's not very good. So it sounds like bad journalism. This first one was actually really small. So again, I'll show you how small it was, a tiny little pink checkbook thing, which she cut out and composed by hand. That must have been an absolute nightmare. Took him forever to do it. Never again, he said, so he didn't do it in that format again, but he did some others which were also quite cool ones. So next slide. These were like A5s, half A4 size. Often uses kind of military kind of images on the front, of hand-drawn things that he drew himself, and covered lots of local bands. He had a kind of a rating system for reviewing records and gigs, where you just kind of ticked a box, or he ticked a box and gave it sort of 1 out of 5, whether it was any good or whether it was brilliant or boring. So that was his kind of innovation on there. But there was lots of other fanzines, as I said, over 50. Next slide. Oh, yeah, that's a good sleeve actually for Damn Latin, like a cassette. So he priced it in shillings, 5 shillings, even though it was after decimalisation. I like this one actually because cassettes were very big at the time. It was a way of releasing stuff. You know, it's really like kind of pre-Bandcamp. You know, it's the only way you could release your own stuff without having to get stuff pressed up on record. Next slide. So this is another local one called Dead Yampy. You might say that's a funny name, Dead Yampy. So Yampy is basically going a bit over the top after having had a few drinks. Dead Yampy is going quite a lot over the top after quite a lot of drinks. And that's something that was very popular in Coventry and other places at the time, particularly at the weekends. So this was a fanzine. These are both issues here, 2 issues, which basically lampooned Coventry culture or drinking culture at the time. So you've got a big beer glass on the front, get it down your neck, it says. And he had this kind of character, Bill and Sue, that Bill would go out drinking and Sue would stay at home and make sandwiches for him and his mates when they came in, and yeah, it had some amusing things. It like cut out beer glass that you could colour in with felt tip if you wanted lager or bitter, and stand by the bar pretending that you bought a pint of beer if you had no money. That kind of thing. So good. It's sold quite a lot actually, nationally as well. Next slide. Here's a few more. The one on the top left is actually really tiny. It's only about that big. It's just a single sheet of A4 folded over into I think 8, called Conceptual Jewellery, which was about a jeweller's, which he said was a conceptual thing. It wasn't really, it was just a jeweller's. And so it's a funny kind of thing, not to do music particularly, but still had the same kind of attitude. And then there's a couple more there. This one here, kind of great masterpieces in the middle, was done anonymously, so he didn't have an address or anything to send stuff into. It's just the views of the editor that produced it. On paper, quite, just stream of consciousness almost. And then Future Days, there's quite a nice sleeve on that, featured bands, and also kind of more political content sometimes as well. Next slide. So this one here, Private Enterprise, on the left here, was actually probably at the time one of the main ones. Although it's produced by 2 school kids that were there, Martin and Jeremy. Still at school while they were doing it. I love this sleeve because it's got this kind of very keen looking baby staring out, very pointedly at you. And I don't know whether they was making a comment on how young they were, but you can see the lettering is using stencils, school graph paper, and that kind of stuff. Stringent Measures, which is on the right there, was produced by a guy called Chris who worked at the local estate agents, and a lot of the kind of photocopying and stuff was probably done on the office photocopier when he was staying late after work to catch up. And I think that's pretty common. Anybody that was in work and had access to office photocopier would often do this kind of thing for their mates who were doing fanzines all themselves. Next slide. So here's a couple more. Issue. That's a great James Dean cover there. It's just a very iconic thing, really. But that was a great fanzine actually as well, and it did feature more kind of political content as well. So that was good. Hallelujah was later on. That was kind of 85 ish when that came out. But that was a really well written one, nicely produced. This is head banging issue. Somebody banging their head against a wall there, just in case you know what head banging was. Yeah, again, the quality of these things, it tended to vary tremendously. We'll see a little bit later on. So let's go on to the next slide and we'll have a look at some more. Leamington's Love Letter from Leamington. That again, quite nice sleeve there. If you see the lettering on the cover, you can see all of these things, and also To Hell with Poverty were hand-drawn lettering rather than fonts. This was pre-internet, pre-computers really, pre-desktop publishing. So there wasn't any ability to just kind of call up your fonts, as I would have hoped to have shown you on the original version of these slides, but I could do that very easily now, reversing type out. Then it was all done very much by hand. To Hell with Poverty, interesting story, actually was it was the name existed before the fanzine existed, so it was kind of advertised in the back of National Music paper as a joke, and then orders started to roll in, so they thought they'd better do a fanzine, so they did it, and I'm glad they did because it was quite a good one. This is a very nice sleeve actually. You've got this collage of these children kind of welcoming in the apocalypse, and 10,000 things every child should know on there, and some lists of some various local bands as well. Next slide. 30 pence actually price point seems to stay the same right the way through. don't seem to be any inflation for fanzine prices. They stayed at 30p from 77 all the way through. So we've got better value as it went along. Antisocial, a kind of a slightly anarchist punky thing, was actually done by these two 12 and 13-year-old kids from a little sleepy village called Meriden, just outside Coventry. They later went on to form the band Napalm Death, which was like a grindcore thing, or a genre of its own. So again, as I say, starting the fanzine started them on a route to doing other things. As you can see, homemade badges here, homemade posters, very kind of cottage industry type of stuff. But kids at school getting involved in this stuff at the time, off their own bat, independently, as a way of actually protesting about stuff. And a lot of the content was actually very insightful and mature writing, really, when you consider the age that they started out. Next slide. Here's some more examples of fanzines that were done by people at school. Runaway Rhinoceros, so with a rhinoceros on the front. I like rhinoceroses, or rhinoceri. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Torn was actually again done by a kid called Mancy, and it was just really basic. It's basically just things cut out of music papers, pictures, and just a couple of lines, often handwritten, about as basic as you could get. But he was doing it, so it just showed it does inspire him to do it. And then Rough Justice, again, was slightly more polished, but still quite a basic thing. So you can see these things are not polished at all, but they are created, from the streets, and that's part of it. Next slide. So that's just a smattering of the other Coventry fanzines. I'm going to come on to the one that I produced now, which was Adventures in Reality, which, even if I say so myself, was one of the major ones that was there, and actually since has been, it tried to do things a bit differently, so it's gained a bit of a reputation as a result. So if you go on to the next slide, this was the first issue. Started out rather than numbers, it was alphabetically numbered, issue A, B, C, etc., and no contents on the sleeve, just a futurist artwork picture there. And even on the little poster that advertised it, this is a John Hartfield 1930s collage, rather gruesome thing really, but just said new fanzine, buy it. It didn't say what was in it at all. We just kind of, and that was a theme for me. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll see more of that. So these are the next couple of issues, B and C. Issue B, actually, that sleeve there was Horace Panther from the Specials, the bass player. They'd been on tour various places, and he used to collect everything. He used to pick these things up like backstage passes, and in the middle there you've got like a bill for damage on their Seaside tour. So 13 microphones had been damaged there, and you've got about 1,400 quid's worth of bill for them to pay back on there, and then other things like matchbook covers and tickets, and even things from the currency exchange there. Just collaged them all together, stuck them on the front. Why not? Probably now they'd be in a museum as artifacts from the time, but there's stuff like stuck on there. And then this other sleeve as well, you can see the background is kind of hand-drawn kind of thing. This background, you have to do all that stuff. No, there's no design, and the pricing is a bit odd as well. 16p. That's exactly what it cost me to produce it. I didn't know how much it would cost me before I did it, so I left it blank and wrote it in. Same goes for issue B as well. Just handwrite in the price when you find out how much it is, because I just think about not making any money. It's a bit silly, really, because you lost money because you would end up giving a few away. Next slide. Here's a couple of posters. So again, the posters didn't have what was in the issue, or weren't even the front cover of the issue. So I'd make these bits of artwork up myself. The one on the right there, is a collage of 3 different images. Schools, I think from Dunkirk, some artillery that's been abandoned, and these little kids doing some exercises. And then there's a quite a crude kind of cartoon on the left-hand side there. But again, not didn't really give you much indication what's inside. It just said it's out there by it. Next slide. Also, it wasn't always easy to even flick your way through these things like you're used to in a newsagent. So you kind of go into Smiths and flick through things to see what's inside them, because they were sealed inside a plastic bag. So this again, it had a collage, this big collage you can read on the slide there for flies, ironed, an image from Dresden. But it was sealed up inside a bag and it had stuff inside it, but you didn't know what was in it apart from what you could see through the clear plastic. So you could rattle it around a bit like the lucky bags that you used to have, where you had like sweets and all sorts of things, and these would be sold in sweet shops where you didn't really know what was in it. You just pay a price and you got stuff. So in this particular one, next slide, this was what was inside it. So, a magazine, pictures, stickers. Some of them had 7-inch singles that I got sent to review, and I would stick those in as well. Sometimes I probably wish I'd kept some of them, but because some of them were good, some of them weren't so good. But I'd often pop those in. Tea bags, sweets, all sorts of things, just bizarre things really that you didn't expect. So you just had to have a bit of faith when you're buying it, and people did buy it, fortunately for me. Next slide. Continuing the bag theme, this one here was actually in a paper bag. So this was the only one I did where actually was more than one colour on the sleeve, but this was screen printed onto a brown paper bag in 2 colours, and I did all these by hand myself, making the screens and printing them. I have to say, not a good idea to try and screen print on a paper bag because it sticks to the screen and it rips unless you peel it off really carefully. And when you're doing it in 2 colours, you've got to then reprint over the same one again in the other colour. So I printed all these very carefully by hand, and 3 out of 4 of them were unusable because they were ripped or smudged. So I did about 500 of these. So you can work out how many I had to do to get that many bags. So 2,000, and it took me about 2 days continuously doing it without a lot of sleep to do that, and I never wanted to see a paper bag ever again after that. Why did I need to do that kind of insane amount of effort? Well, next slide. My plan originally was to have on the right of the slide here this as the cover, so no name at all, but just a body art image. Now, unfortunately, the body art image was a nude image, and therefore the shops went, oh no, that's rude, we can't possibly show that. Hence I've blocked it out a little bit to save your sensibilities and stop me from getting banned from this as well. But of course censorship was effectively they said no, we're not doing it, censor it. So I thought, okay, I'll just put it in a bag, but a non-transparent bag, and then people will still be able to buy it and they'll get it, and then they can be shocked when they open it. So I put it inside this plain bag, along with the usual kind of bits and bobs I used to put inside, including a toffee, which actually, because it's quite a warm time of the year, it melted and stuck to the bag, so it wasn't a great idea. But you've got to try these things, haven't you? So next slide. So another example, just this is, it's got a badge stuck to a different cover, and you can see the kind of style of it, different lettering, different style of photograph, and this burning Buddha from Saigon on the cover there. Again, no contents at this point. Next slide. This is an inside page, just again, just to give you a feel for the kind of weird angles that the type was at, how it was, a real mixture of typeface. If anything went, basically, you stick cartoons, like there's a cartoon at the bottom there that you put in there that out of context things that you just put in for amusement, really. Next slide. This one here was actually a folder. It came in a clear plastic bag again, but it was a folder that flipped open, so it was an A3 sheet folded round with just images of the city centre on it, kind of concretey images. Next slide. And this is what you've got inside it. So it folded out. It was an essay on urban life, and then the magazine itself, and probably a couple of stickers and things as well, I'm sure. Next slide. So another look at a couple more. This one here actually was with the fanzine that we talked about earlier, Damn Latin. So this was a compilation issue. A few of these used to happen occasionally, where you team up with another fanzine and you produce a joint issue. But in this particular case, I wanted to keep them joint but separate. So this is like a folder, like a wallet. So if you go to the next slide, you can see how it works. That's our fingerprints on the front, by the way. It kind of flips up, and you've got two complete magazines inside it, A5 size. So they're completely separate, but they're contained within an outer wallet that's got a bit of information, a bit of artwork on it. And then again, the poster for it does not feature the sleeve, but there's this image which I've adapted of Marilyn Monroe and turned her into this kind of mad cat woman. Yeah, so that's just again just an example of the kind of artwork on posters was again separate from that. So a lot of this is about the artwork and the concept. So it's more just a magazine. It's about just trying to do something a bit different, really. Next slide. And then I started to put stuff on the sleeve because it started to get distributed more in the United States and other places. So I just started to put some stuff on the sleeve there. If you go to the next slide, you'll see again, instead of colour, I used a coloured paper as a backing, but you can see use of cartoons here. The typeface layer, or it's not really typeface, if you write things, if you're right-handed and you write things with your left hand, it's very hard to do. So it comes out very childish, a bit like a child learning how to write. So that's how I did this there, and it means you can fit it very easily around things. So again, with no computer, you can't wrap stuff around images in the same way we can do now. You have to space it out. So you would probably, or I would, I know, have done this in a very light pencil first to get it all to fit in, and then gone over it with that. And then this image of this kind of, that's a World War I doll with a rather haunted expression on its face, which I thought was a bit strange, really, to have a doll based on something so horrible. So I'll put it on the front cover, and then you've got some other cartoons in there as well. So go to the next slide. It came with a flexi disc. These were quite popular at the time. 7-inch singles done on a kind of thin floppy plastic, but you could play them. And this again was by the band Attrition, which was the band of the editor of Alternative Sounds. So that link continues there, and this was their first kind of non-cassette release, just with 2 tracks on it. I actually gave some of these away with the hardcover issues of the Adventure Reality book, so you could get it. It's a special edition. Next slide. And this is kind of towards the end of the run. So again, the image on the left there was actually done by a flatmate or housemate, Michael Collin, who just scribbled this over breakfast one day, and I thought it was good, so I scribbled it up and used it. And the lettering's made out of strips of black paper, just kind of scalpeled out to make up the heading there. The Last Supper, this image is called The Dead Mourn the Living. It's kind of reversal. Was actually a magazine and a cassette, and that sold about almost 2,000 copies, which is quite a lot at the time, because some of the bands it had on it were very popular, and that meant it got into lots of stores all over the world as well, so that spread the name of it. And yeah, it was good. Next slide, I think is the last one. Yeah, so 2012, so a long time after it kind of finished, really, which finished in '85, did a reprise for a re-release of a vinyl album on an American label of my band Stress. So it was a reissue thing. So I did a special edition which was just about Stress, but of Adventures in Reality in the same kind of style. And then of course there's the book as well, which is, this big chunky thing here. Can't see that probably very well, but it's a big chunky book with it all in. This image on the front, coming back to Rhinoceri, this guy that drew this originally was 1747 anatomical artist called Jan van der Laar, Dutch, and he obviously thought it was a bit boring just drawing anatomical skeletons and other things for medical journals, so he thought he'd spice it up by putting these kind of semi-classical backgrounds with large zoo animals in them, like a rhinoceros in this particular case in the back, which is a completely mad thing to do. And I just thought that is kind of punk before punk, really. That is subverting a very staid medical establishment with something that is completely nuts, and just sneaking it in the background there and actually draws your eye completely away from the anatomical skeleton drawing to the rhinoceros. What the hell is that doing there? Because it's huge. So I thought that's great. So I used that for the front and back sleeve. Also, these were a couple of things that I produced in the back at the time, back in the day, if you like, which were small spin-off ones done anonymously, spoof, humorous ones, not about music, but just really kind of taking the mickey a little bit out of it. But sleeves are quite good, all hand coloured, 10p, got small things just sold in a couple of shops. But again, there's certain substances, you've got like a speech bubble or thought bubble shared by a dinosaur and two young boys. Why? I don't know. It made sense at the time, I'm sure. But again, it's a fun thing to do. So I think next slide. I think we're coming to the end of it now. So just to wrap up, that's all very well. But does it have any relevance today? Is it just nostalgia, just a long gone and soon to be forgotten art form? Kind of, or is it relevant today? It's kind of yes and yes, really. So yes, it is an art form that needs to be preserved, hence doing the books on it and doing things like this and capturing the images, because it's something that is of its time, but actually is very evocative and is still of interest today, I think. But it also does have other relevance as well. So if you go on to the next slide, it shows that you don't necessarily need technology to be inventive. It's kind of it's a habit, really, isn't it? We kind of just use, I must use Photoshop, I must use get a font, download it online, but you can do stuff yourself quite easily, sometimes quicker. So cut and paste, we are familiar with using it in a kind of computing way, but physical cut and paste is actually much better. So getting physical, which is dropped off the end there, because again, I couldn't share the original ones, which had a nice font on that, so it kind of proves my point, really. Yeah, just get physical. And next slide. There's 3 points here. Nothing's correct, really, when it comes to technique. So I went to art college, and they would have the lecturers there would kind of say, this is how you do this, this is how you do that, and they would mark your work. And I thought that was nonsense. How can you mark art? It's all in the eye of the beholder and the person that's producing it. And actually, if it looks good, it is good. So nothing's correct. When it comes to technique, if it looks good, it is good. That should say, but it's dropped off the bottom there. And then thirdly, good things happen when you break the mold, I would say. And also, I guess, just going with the flow. So I think this is a good example today, actually, where we couldn't get the slide to share properly because of various technical issues we're familiar with from doing these kind of things. But we can still do it anyway. You just kind of adapt. But if you try and just do things differently, good things usually happen. Jumping on the bandwagon, trying to be like everybody else, trying to be conventional, will just make you like everybody else and conventional. It's not going to make you stand out, and it's important to stand out. I definitely felt that, which is why I did some of the unusual formats. Others did too. So yeah, I think those lessons, you can still do that kind of thing with the attitude. So next slide, I think is the last one, isn't it? Yes, last ones anyway. Bit of a plug here. There's the book. Quite chunky things you can see. Available, a complete collection, so you can get all of this stuff and more inside that book. Still available if you want to buy it, a mere £20. It's good value, actually. And next one is the other book. Next slide, Phil. Tales from the Ghost Town. So there it is. So which has got all of those fanzines and more inside it, and more information on each one. So if you are interested, then that's quite a good way of getting hold of that information. And I think next slide, I believe is the last one. Yes, thanks for listening. And which should say Adventure in Reality on there. Again, the font has gone a bit large, but doesn't matter. Thank you for listening, either live or on the playback. And are there any questions? So Mrs. T will be our question master, but she'll delegate that to Phil, I think. There are questions in the chat, which I don't Phil might have been monitoring as we go along, so I'll hand back to him now for questions, but thanks for your time.
Okay. We've just got something about poor Nicola. Right, okay. She's finally got in, that's good. Comments from Sarah, that was amazing. Thank you very much, Alan. And we've got some questions here as well. Are there any good printed fanzines still out there?
Yes, there are. Here's one here. Can you put me on the main screen actually, Phil?
Yeah, sure, no problems.
Stop sharing now because you don't really want to see.
Right.
I'll get face. Sure, she wouldn't mind. It's scary, isn't it? That finger pointing at you. Yeah, so this is one here. I'll get back a little bit. See that Kodak Ghost Run Amok, which is actually the title of a song by Arliss and Garza from Nuneaton, but this is a more of an old school style one. Really, it's better printed than we would have because. And it's it's easy to produce these things now, but it's done very much in the style, and there are others as well. So they're still going, and zines, as they now call them, they don't call them fanzines anymore, they call them zines, are often in art schools, and they're done for therapeutic reasons. I said football fanzines are still going, so yeah, you still got these fanzines. I mean, you still got some there's one called Positive Creed. There's lots of punk style fanzines that are produced very much in the way that they used to do them. So yeah, they are still going, but the numbers are really small in terms of what they can do, and of course they're sold on the internet rather than. I used to go up and down the queues for gigs. People are queuing up waiting to get in. It's a good time to catch them. We even used to go around pubs sometimes selling them to drunk people in Coventry pubs, which was verging on suicidal. If you've got like dyed hair, as I had at the time, blue and red hair, I was pretty scrawny, and these people were drunk and a lot bigger than me, and why would I be trying to sell them a fanzine? I don't know, but I did. Someone even bought them. Perhaps they felt sorry for me.
There was a question about where can we buy the book, but Neil's just said we can share your contact details, Alan, if that's okay.
Yes, you can. So there's 2 books. It's an opportunity to plug them. So this is I'm going to have to stand back a little bit because I don't know if you can see that. This is the Missing Reality book. So it's quite a thick book. This is a hardcover edition, which they've all sold out. There's a softcover one as well. That's still available. And this one here is a Tales from the Ghost Town one, which again it's got, you can see, lots of it's all in there. That one there is just going to a second print run now, so you can order it, and that will arrive in due course.
That's great.
Yeah.
Alan, can I ask you a question here? While we're waiting for maybe people to put some more questions up, did doing this then facilitate your entry into art college, or were you already there?
No, I was doing art college at locally in Coventry at the time, and actually it actually facilitated it for me because it meant I could use their dark rooms.
Right.
So even after I'd left that college, I still used to go and use their dark rooms because they didn't work. They recognised my face vaguely on the reception. There was no swipe cards or anything like that. You have to go through now. You won't get in now. There'd be CCTV everywhere, but it wasn't then. So as long as you looked a little bit studenty, which meant dishevelled, a bit hungover, with a scarf, you get in there. And I could easily look like that, at the time. That was my natural look. So there's no problem. And because I've been there, people go, oh, it looks a bit familiar, it's probably okay. So I used to go in there, use all their stuff. That screen printing I did at the college as well, because they had the screen printing things there, so I use all the ink. So shouldn't say that, should I really? No. Of course, I was very grateful. Thank you.
The other point I'd like to make is I'm involved in an art project that is involving rhizo printing. Yeah.
Right-side printing, yeah, that's
and we've got a whole project going with kids making their own comics. Kids are really into doing this, and it's working with school and other youth groups. Yeah, really good.
So yeah, you get zine workshops as well. They're quite popular now, where you just get a load of materials and you put them and glue them together. So it's kind of evolved on from being like a kind of a punk or more a kind of an adult thing to being quite wide now. As I said, we've got people 12 and 13-year-old making their own fanzines then. So it's not a million miles away really.
It's good. It's also interesting that this is also picking up on what I would call some of the more forgotten aspects about that time period, particularly some of the visual looks. So you've got Paul Gorman's work on Barney Bubbles, for example, who goes back pre-punk as well as into the punk era as well. And he's just published a book on him. And again, a lot of people picked it up at the time, but you didn't sort of know much about who Barney Bubbles was or where he'd come from or anything like that. And the same really with this.
There's a lot of books. There's a couple I've just got recently, which I've got down there, which are really big, thick books on design. And there's quite a few reprint books, like Sniffing Glue you can get reprinted. There's one called Grim Humour, is a very good one. That's reprinting in 3 different volumes. The second one's just come out, and there's others as well. So for the eventually, I think this other one, there was a label called Fourth Dimension, and I just basically said, I wish somebody would reprint them all. And this was on a Facebook post, and they got in touch and said, yeah, we'll do it. And that was it, really. It's that easy. So, of course, putting it together was a bit more work, but yeah, the interest is there, definitely. And the Coventry Fanzine book has been a lot of interest, obviously in Coventry, but also this, they've gone all over the world. So you get orders in from all over the place. So it's not just UK, USA, Norway, all over.
I always felt it was a rather forgotten sort of part of visual culture in the UK and that period. Have you talked about this in things like art schools, for example?
Yeah, well, I've done one talk for Norwich art school for the graphic art thing, which was like this but different. It focused more on techniques. So things like, I'll show you this. You see these things, John Ball printing outfit. Okay, so these were at the time. This is the one I had, number 12. They're different numbers based on how big the box was really. But these things were like, you get these little letters, and you these tiny little rubber letters and a pair of tweezers. They're really not very good little metal tweezers, and you'd have to pick them out and squeeze them in there. So it's really difficult to do. And then you could get a stamp, and then you could stamp your covers with them, but also you can enlarge them on a photocopier, so they make headings out of them. That's a very hand done way of doing things, literally. But they probably still sell these things. I should think so. They certainly do for the little Dymo lettering things, where it presses it out into a little plastic strip like black, and it squeezes it and it makes it white. Those are still available, so you can still do those. And these have become iconic looks now. They're replicated using Photoshop and things like that. But you can just do them in the original way. Why not? Yeah,
it's also interesting in that if you take it even further back, we have a culture in the UK of people would print things. There's all sorts of pamphlets and everything. If you go back into Georgian times, for example,
Shelley, all that stuff came out.
We're all going crazy, and there was a real local press as well, and people would do their own pamphleteers and things like that. And it's kind of interesting to sort of locate that back into that time period as well.
It is, and it's very. I mean, I previously said it's the ultimate form of self-expression, because you can do it completely by yourself. You don't rely on anybody else. So if I was to, for this, we rely on crowdcast, we rely on the internet. We couldn't do it without that. These are big corporate organisations, really. If I was, doing a record, I would need distributors to do it for that. And you do, making films. Basically, any other thing that you do relies on corporate permission to do it. you know, even just writing stuff on Facebook, you can be banned if you say stuff you don't agree with. So, but in a fanzine, you know, it's physical. You print it yourself. You get it photocopied anywhere. Take it to another one if you don't like it. I used to do that when they said I didn't like that sleeve. You know, my normal printer refused to print it. It's rude. They said, you know, it's not rude. It's, you know, you go into National Gallery, you wouldn't have anything there if you did that. So, so I just took it to another printer, and they said, yeah, we'll print it. Just give us some money, we'll print it. So they don't care. So you can get around censorship and just express yourself completely in this way, because you don't rely on any other means of production but yourself.
Yeah. Okay. We don't have any further comments so far. There was a good, interesting comment about potentially doing this on Teams, which I would agree with. It's more interactive, can do more things.
Yeah. I'm sorry about the fact that the slide didn't work at the start. We're kind of used to these things now, aren't we? Online, it did work in rehearsal, but it didn't work this time. But never mind. We had a backup plan, which wasn't quite slick, but there you go. You know, it worked. And the thing is, you got the content, and you got my input on that. So
it's very interesting.
Hopefully, it's still interesting for you.
Well, if there isn't anything else, I'd like to thank everybody for coming along. I'd like to thank Alan for a really interesting presentation, and also it was really great to have that sort of in-depth look at visual culture from that time period, which is really largely forgotten about, I think, in the UK.
Well, not anymore. I think there's so much stuff
thanks to the book.
Getting to be quite popular.
So it might be perhaps an area whose time has come once again. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming along. Thank you, Alan, again, and hopefully we'll see you all again on another webinar in the near future. Apologies for the failure of the typeface, because I still have a corporate typeface, unfortunately, on my Windows.
Yeah, it looked really cool.
It did.
It's such a shame. Never mind.
Well,
these things happen.
It happens. But okay, everyone, we'll see you again soon. Have a nice weekend. Remember, please stay safe and well. Thanks very much. Bye.
Okay, thanks, Ian.
Bye.